Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience, and welcome to the webinar titled The ABCs of Clinical Trial Management Systems, presented by Perficient's Padam Singh, Director of Clinical Trial Management Solutions. My name is Eugene Stefanov, and I am the Marketing Manager for Perficient's Life Sciences practice. And before I turn it over to Padam, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items with you. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. You may submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature, which is located on the left side of your screen. Please make sure you state your questions clearly, and keep in mind that other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. However, your questions to the speaker will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information about our services, feel free to use the contact information on the various slides throughout the presentation. You can also fill out the contact form on the Life Sciences section of Perficient's website. Keep in mind that today's webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you within several days. A link to the PDF version of the presentation will also be included in that email. So this wraps up our housekeeping items. I would now like to turn the call over to Padam Singh.
Thank you, Eugene. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's Perficient Life Sciences CTMS webinar. Today we are going to be discussing the ABCs of CTMS. So we're going to go through some basic ideas of what a CTMS is, what types of organizations need them, some key functions, and some best practices when implementing and selecting CTMS systems. So let me start out by introducing myself. My name is Padam Singh. I am the Director of the CTMS practice at Perficient Life Sciences Business Unit. I've been working in the industry since '99 and almost exclusively been working with Siebel Clinical during that time. I've been with Perficient Life Sciences Business Unit for over 6 years, since 2008, including my time at Biopharm Systems as well. And before that, I was part of Accenture's Pharma R&D practice and leading Siebel CTMS implementations there as well. And now overall, been a part of over 30 implementations of CTMS. And let me start by a little bit of introduction to our company. For those of you who might not know, Perficient is a large global information technology consulting organization. And actually, we serve clients mainly throughout North America and Europe. And our strategy and goal is to really help provide business and technology solutions for companies to be able to be more efficient in what they do on a daily basis. One of our primary goals is to work with clients not only to deliver solutions, but also to really become a partner with those clients. And we don't want to necessarily implement something and walk away. We want to continue to be there to help provide solutions for you that help meet your business needs. So Perficient was founded in 1997. Again, you'll see that we have many offices throughout the United States. We also have some global and offshore resources in different countries as well. We have a pretty sizable workforce in which resources are aligned to specific technologies or industries and have established themselves as respected thought leaders in their area of expertise. And again, as you can see here, repeat business is one of our main focuses that we like to talk about. Again, we want to build partnerships with organizations and not just the consulting organizations that are just implementing solutions. And this slide just here shows some of the areas that we do focus on and that we have across our global consulting organizations, which we bring expertise around various business solutions and technology solutions that we bring to our clients. So a little bit about our life science business unit. A lot of you have probably heard the name Biopharm Systems, and within life sciences, Biopharm was acquired by Perficient in April of this year, and now we are the life science business unit within Perficient's industry groups. Since the acquisition, basically our team, our Biopharm team of experts has remained completely intact. So our services offerings are still the same across the life sciences arena. We still have 4 distinct practices or focus areas within our business unit. I lead the clinical trial management solution practice, where we focus on CTMS and our accelerated solution Ascend, as well as mobile CRA. We also have the clinical data management practice, clinical safety and pharmacovigilance, and the clinical data warehousing practices as well. And they focus on their own set of products, applications, and offerings. Within each of our practices, we offer the same level of industry and technology expertise as we always have in implementing and hosting the various applications that we support. And I'd like to just wrap up introductions to talk about a little bit about our CTMS practice and explain a little bit more about what we do. We provide a variety of services and products related to CTMS. We manage implementations of Siebel Clinical, whether those are custom implementations or implementations of our Siebel Clinical Accelerator Ascend. We also are starting to implement mobile CRA, which is the mobile application, the mobile app that runs on Android and iPad for CTMS. Also, if you've seen some of our previous webinars, you know that we do some extensive work on integration in and out of Siebel Clinical and related systems. Our approach to system implementation is very process focused, and we also provide our business process consulting services to help organizations define and harmonize their SOPs and business processes across their organization with respect to, again, clinical trial management. And we offer comprehensive training services and products related to the applications that we support as well. So here's today's agenda. We're going to start out with sort of an in-depth look at what a CTMS system is, or a clinical trial management system is, what type of organizations need one. We'll go over some really, some key functions of the CTMS and what they should have. Next, we'll touch on how an organization goes about selecting a CTMS that meets their specific requirements and budget. We're also going to discuss the various system types and implementation options that are worth considering during that selection process. We're going to wrap up the presentation with a discussion of some best practices that can help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that often impede implementation. And then we'll have some time for questions. And again, if you do have a question as we go through the presentation, just feel free to submit it in the chat feature. Those questions will come to me, and then we'll answer them during the question and answer session as we have time. So with that, let's get started. So first, what is a CTMS? So a clinical trial management system, or CTMS, is a technology solution designed to help companies manage all non-clinical aspects of clinical trials efficiently and effectively, and thereby reduce time and cost throughout the clinical trial process. A quality, robust CTMS essentially tracks each step of the clinical trial process from study startup to study closeout. It'll serve as a central repository of clinical trial management information, such as investigators, sites, subject enrollment, site visits, payments, etc. So with a single system, information such as investigator names and addresses only need to be entered once, which saves time and reduce error. And with all of your clinical trial information in one place, it becomes much easier to extract that information and use it to make informed decisions about the future, future trials, or answer any questions about the past. So who needs a CTMS? A CTMS can be very useful to several kinds of organizations of various sizes, such as pharmaceutical companies, contract research organizations or CROs, medical device companies, academic institutions. But the common element across all of these organizations is that they regularly manage multiple trials at the same time. So organizations that are in that situation often use several tracking tools to keep themselves organized, whether that's paper logs or spreadsheets for things like contact names and addresses, patient visits, payments, investigational products, supplies, and even monitoring visits. So, tracking this information in a variety of different places causes extra work and creates room for error. It also makes it difficult to pull together reports, both for internal review and for outside auditors. Plus, these tools are rather difficult to validate, keep validated. So for organizations that function like this, with conducting multiple trials at the same time, a CTMS can be a breath of fresh air and an investment that really pays for itself through the efficiencies that it will enable. So next, let's discuss some key functions of a CTMS. A CTMS can support an extremely robust investigator and site database that enables complex tracking of individuals and organizations that are related to your trials. You can track information such as specialties, experience, patient demographics of the doctors, as well as facilities and equipment that are available at various clinics and institutions. In addition to investigators and hospitals or clinics, your contact and account database also allows you to track information about any person or organization that you may interact with on a clinical trial, such as lab technicians, pharmacists, vendor resources like vendor contract officers, and shipping and printing vendors as organizations, and even CROs that you use as organizations. So you can see the value of tracking more than just your investigators within a central place. You can also track performance of these individuals and organizations on previous trials. And then you can query all of that data to streamline your site selection process. Or even aid in choosing a vendor for a specific service on future trials. So, this feature enables you to pick the highest performing investigators and sites to ensure a smoother trial. And once you've selected your investigators and sites, you can use your CTMS to track essential documents and other site initiation tasks, and to set up subject visit schedules and standard payment amounts, and so forth for study setup. Once the study is underway, the CTMS is used to track everything, from a site management perspective, from site budgets to monitoring reports. So for organizations without a centralized system, each of these bullet points on this slide is usually a separate spreadsheet, or at least a separate tab in one big spreadsheet. But with the CTMS, all of this information is consolidated, is tracked in one place, which requires less work to maintain and enable real-time, robust reporting. Also, with the CTMS, many of these processes can be at least partially automated with integrations to other systems, such as clinical data management systems or EDC systems for subject and subject visit data information, or a supply system for product supplies tracking information. So one of the most useful aspects of a CTMS can be the enrollment statistics that it provides. You can easily learn how quickly specific sites are enrolling patients, which sites are consistently experiencing screen failures, which sites are completing subjects on schedule, and other related information. And you can cut that data any way you like, such as by country or by study, so you can get full access to real-time enrollment statistics for the entire study. CTMS also streamlines the document tracking process for trials, which we know can be a large and costly component of every trial. A CTMS can help standardize the documents that must be collected from or sent to each site, even country-specific documents. And then this information can be queried or searched to learn, for example, which medical licenses are expiring in the next 30 days, or how many documents are due today but have not yet been collected. So there's a series of searches that you can do within a CTMS to actually track how well you're doing, in that sort of document tracking process within your organization. A CTMS can also provide robust financial tracking for sites, countries, studies, projects, and individual primary investigators. And when you integrate, with an accounts payable system, the site payments process can be almost entirely automated, except for those steps where you want that human intervention, where you're looking for payment approvals and verification of activities that have been performed that are ready to be paid for. But essentially, after you track that with an integration to a financial system, you can actually automate that whole payment process between the two systems. And finally, perhaps the most beneficial function of a CTMS is its reporting capabilities. Of course, the ability to track all the information is important, but if we can't get that information out of the system in a very meaningful way, it's not very beneficial. So when all of your trial data is now maintained in a centralized database, the ability to find answers to all of your trial-related questions becomes much, much easier. You don't have to look across multiple spreadsheets or try to collect multiple spreadsheets and tools to try to see how you're doing across studies. And when you have real-time answers to all these questions, you can make well-informed decisions and really have a real impact on your business. So now that we know more about what a CTMS can do and what sorts of organizations can benefit from one, let's talk about how to go about choosing the right system for your organization. So the first step in any software selection process is to gather your requirements. This can be done in a number of ways, such as analyzing your current process and tools. You look at the features and functionality lists of commercial systems and talk with colleagues at other organizations. So, if we just look at our current processes just within our own organization, that might be limiting in the scope of the requirements. We really want to, understand where the industry is headed, understand what features and functionality are available. So really, looking across all those measures is going to be a way to get a comprehensive list of requirements. So once you have that comprehensive, prioritized list that includes feedback from all stakeholders, you're ready to schedule demos of systems. You may first want to look internally within your organization for cases where potentially other departments, or areas within your business may be utilizing applications that you can leverage before looking to external vendors for demos. We did have a situation where a company was looking to implement a CTMS across their multiple global business units, and each of those global business units were operating essentially as individual companies since they were acquired businesses. And when the CTMS initiative was underway, they realized that one of their business units already had a CTMS in place. So they evaluated that internal application and determined that it met their global needs, and it saved a significant amount in licensing and implementation costs by selecting an already established internal system. But of course, if no internal tool or application exists or is in use, then reaching out to external vendors for demos is the next step. Each system that you do consider should be evaluated against your prioritized list of requirements to ensure objective decision making. After you look at each demo, look at the requirements the system did not meet and determine how critical these gaps are and whether they can be addressed within your budget through some sort of configurations or customizations or workarounds. So as you gather your requirements, you'll want to consider the various types of systems that exist and determine which one makes the most sense for your organization in terms of functionality, implementation time, and budget. A standard CTMS simply refers to a system that can be used out of the box without any sort of configurations or enhancements. Selecting a standard system can usually save time, but you run the risk of not getting all the functionality that you need. Another option is to go with an accelerator solution, which essentially is a standard system that has been pre-configured. So there's additional functionality. So it comes with several commonly requested enhancements or configurations. Accelerators are really designed to streamline and reduce the implementation time for these standard solutions. So that could be a good choice for companies that need a robust system with a lot of functionality but don't have the budget to do or time to do all of the customizations themselves. And the last step is, a customized CTMS is, it's either, you start with a standard system or you start with an accelerator system, but then you modify it to meet your organization's specific needs. So you're really making it specific to your sort of business and business process. This option is probably, the best way to meet all of your requirements, but it also tends to be the most expensive and most time-consuming choice. So, if you're leaning to go this way, a great way to reduce your time and cost of a customized CTMS is to start with an accelerator solution that potentially already meets many of your requirements. So then you only have to customize or configure, slightly to meet some additional, specific requirements for your organization. So once you've looked at your functionality requirements and your time and budget constraints, it should become clear, sort of which type of systems would best meet your organization's needs, across standard, accelerator, or a customized system. So once you've determined the best system types, you'll want to consider the various implementation options that are available. So this is when requirements from your IT organization really become critical. So depending on the size and capacity of your IT department, you may want to implement your CTMS completely on-site at your organization, or you might want to share at least some of that load with an implementation partner. So with an in-house implementation, your organization essentially buys all of the software licenses and necessary hardware and stores and maintains the hardware on site. This gives your organization complete control and responsibility for the system, but it also requires a great deal of knowledge, time, and resources, physical space, from your organization. With hosted implementation, the housing and maintenance of the hardware is handled by an external partner instead of your organization. So this reduces the organization's control a little bit, but it also relieves it from the burden of having to have knowledgeable on-site resources with the time to maintain servers as well as physical space to house all of the equipment. So hosting has become increasingly popular, especially for smaller, mid-sized organizations, but even larger organizations are starting to see the benefits of hosted environments. So they don't, companies that don't necessarily have the capital to invest in a large in-house IT department, or they choose not to, tend to take this option. And these days there's several kinds of hosting solutions to choose from as well. So with hosting options, dedicated hosting is where, and this is sort of nomenclature that is prevalent. You may have heard different terminology across each of these types, but what I'll call dedicated hosting is where you own the hardware, you own the software already. It's just simply the external data center is basically just housing and maintaining those servers. So as your extension of your IT department. So at any time, you still have the ability to bring that hardware and software internally for an in-house setup. Shared hosting is where you own the software application, but you're essentially leasing the hardware which your software is on, and again, the data center is providing and maintaining that. So if your organization wants to bring that application in-house, they would have to make the hardware purchase to bring their application in-house on their own in-house hardware. And then the last option is cloud computing or software as a service, known as SaaS, which assumes that your organization does not own any hardware or software, and essentially it's just leasing the service to be able to use the applications on demand. And so as your user base or demand increases, they just increase their subscription accordingly. So you don't necessarily incur any cost for hardware maintenance or replacements, but you really don't own anything in the scenario and simply using the software as a true service. So clearly there are many things to consider during your selection process, not just functionality. So here are some best practices to make sure that you end up with sort of exactly what you need. You'll want to start out by identifying all of the stakeholder departments and a representative from each department to collect feedback from their respective department. So once you have all of that input, you want to ensure that everyone's needs are addressed by the list of requirements. Don't forget to consider both where you are today and where you plan to be in 2 to 5 years. You're going to want to implement a system that can support you as you grow and that is has the ability to scale. Next, don't limit your requirements to simply system functionality. Consider system types and hosting options along with data migration and integration needs. And you also want to include sort of soft requirements such as vendor responsiveness and the level of help desk support required by your organization from your vendors. And finally, once you have your comprehensive list, you'll need to prioritize it and get buy-in from all of the stakeholders on that prioritization. You want to divide your requirements into must-haves and nice-to-haves, and then rank all of your nice-to-haves. Assign different weights. Develop a scale. Such as 0 to 5, 5 being meets the requirement exactly, versus 0, the system doesn't meet that requirement. So if you use some sort of rating system like this, you'll sort of ensure objectivity, and a system that truly meets your needs will hopefully sort of present itself through that process. So once you've selected your system and your implementation option, it's time to determine your implementation strategy. For implementations that involve anything beyond using the system out of the box, there's always the question of big bang or phased approach. The big bang approach is enticing because it means you get everything you need all at once, but it also means a large upfront investment, and also there's a longer waiting period before you actually get to use the system and before your end users get to use the system. Also, we found that once users begin to use the system in their day-to-day lives, they usually discover additional requirements as they sort of use and become familiar with it. And so the big bang approach generally depletes the budget for future enhancements, or at least for a while. So the users will have to wait longer for these additional requirements typically. We have had some few early adopters of Siebel CTMS, that took on the Big Bang approach, in which they included application enhancements, data integration, data migration, and system automation components. These projects were pretty large, in which in some cases took over a year or longer to deploy the initial phase. But since data integration and other components are dependent on the base sort of application functionality, it ended up being like trying to hit a moving target in completing those aspects of the project. So it can lead to sort of multiple iterations. Also, again, once they deployed the system and the users had time to use it for a few months, the users inevitably come up with additional requirements for enhancements that not only affect the base application functionality, but the need to potentially update interfaces as well in subsequent phases. So, we usually recommend that you plan for a phased implementation. This strategy allows your core business or your critical business needs to be addressed in the initial phase very, very quickly, and then requirements to be refined at the beginning of each subsequent phase based on the input from experienced users of the system. Also, this allows for a stable CTMS system from which to build integrations in a phase 2 or subsequent phase scenario. In addition to the flexibility this strategy provides, user feedback is generally more positive with this approach, as is user adoption, because new tools and processes are easier to accept in smaller chunks. The more quickly your users master the new system, the faster you can see that sort of return on investment. But a phased approach alone, it doesn't necessarily guarantee success. So there's a lot more work to be done well in advance of your go-live date to ensure a smooth transition to your new system. So let's look at some best practices for before implementation. So prior to beginning your implementation, here are some steps that we recommend you take. Assembling your project team, making sure that you include, again, representatives from all of the stakeholder groups, including IT and each area of the business that will be affected by the new system. Determine who's going to lead the project, who will have authority to make decisions, who will be part of the core team, who's going to be part of the extended team. Decide how often the core and extended teams will meet and how much time in between meetings each member will be expected to work on that project. Then write all of that down in develop a project charter and have the team formally agree to it. For team members who are non-managers, consider having their managers approve their employees' time commitment as well to the project in addition to their day jobs. You have to determine the tasks, deliverables, deadlines, responsible resources. Be sure to include all of the tasks that we mention in these best practices, not just typical system development lifecycle and validation tasks. There's a lot more than just that. Create a scope control plan. It's incredibly easy for the project scope to creep during an implementation, especially a long project. So it's wise to come up with a strategy for handling that ahead of time. With a formal process for requesting, reviewing, and approving scope changes like additional requirements. You can ensure that all of the downstream effects are considered and not only the business, and only business critical changes are allowed in that process. You'll want to design your communication plan. Consider all of your audiences for that project, the topics and level of detail they're going to care about, and the best method of reaching them during that implementation, and the frequency with which they should be updated. You also want to begin your SOP gap analysis. So once you've selected your system, you should have enough information to begin analyzing your existing SOPs and identifying the gaps. And I'm sure you'll all agree that the SOP authoring, review, and approval process can sometimes be quite long, so it's best to start working on that task as early as possible. You'll also want to begin analyzing the organizational structure. So with the introduced introduction of a new system, the structure of the organization around it will most likely change. So it's best to start considering these changes early so you can identify the gaps and begin figuring out who will fill those gaps. A key consideration for a CTMS implementation is really how the administration tasks will be handled. Will they be centralized or decentralized within the application? We generally find that a centralized approach works well, but it truly depends on your specific organizational culture and needs. So once you've created sort of formal plans for managing your project, it's really important to stick with them. That way everyone involved will know exactly what to expect and what is expected of them. But it's also wise to consider your communication plan a living document so that you're able to make adjustments when you receive feedback, that the communication is too frequent or infrequent, too high level or too detailed. Once that project is underway, it's time to start designing your rollout, training, and support plans as well. Are you planning to release the use of the system to all of the users all at once? Are you going to potentially pilot a study? Will you cut over studies that are already in progress, or will you maintain two systems for a while? So once you determine your rollout plan, you can begin formulating your training plan. If all the users will go live at once, you'll need to plan for training all at once. If you will make the transition study by study, you might want to train one study team at a time. So again, once you determine who's going to be, who you'll be training and when, you can decide which methods and material would be the most effective based on your, again, organizational culture and the characteristics of your user groups. The post-go-live support plan should include multiple levels of support. We often see clients identify a super user in each of their business areas, which serves as their first tier of support for the users in their respective area, for basic sort of how do I do X in the system. And then it'll be followed by sort of in-house help desk support, and then external support provided by your implementation partner or your system vendor. But beyond identifying these tiers, the support plan should also consider how to maximize the help tools that are built into the system, as well as additional training documentation like job aids and refresher training and things like that, and how frequently those approaches are utilized. So as you can see here, the rollout, training, and support plans are very much linked together. So that require a lot of careful thought and consideration to support both the immediate and long-term success of the project. Another best practice is related to user adoption, so involve your users early and often. Not only should they be involved in the selection process and the project team, they should be involved in design workshops, document reviews, and test execution. You can also consider having a sandbox environment installed as early as possible, with the caveat that development, if you're doing development, it will be ongoing. So you have to manage around that. But also plan to have everyone who will be involved in test execution formally sort of trained prior to testing. They don't necessarily need to be trained on the whole system, but at least training for test execution. So that's going to ensure a smoother testing process and minimize any anxiety in the testers. So for example, if they don't know how to use the system and they struggle with some of the test steps, they may develop a negative view of the system and become resistant to adopting it. So the sooner the users are exposed to the system, the smoother the transition will be. So as you can imagine, implementation of a new system is a great time to review or possibly create a data standards document. So this ensures that all users know how and in what format data should be entered in the system. The document should cover everything from what to enter in each line of the address record, for example, the expected use of abbreviations, and the expected use and values in comment fields, and to the format of a site number. So, we had scenarios where clients implemented a new system, but didn't take the time to develop clear standards for your data. So that led to things like, addresses that were, 100 Main Street with street spelled out S-T-R-E-E-T, and other addresses that are 100 Main Street with ST period in the system. So you'll end up with duplicate data potentially if you're not adhering to those data standards. So it's important to do that. Or some users were using address line 2 for department name and address line 3 for suite number, and other users were using it sort of in reverse. So you can imagine searching through a system like that can be pretty frustrating since you don't know which field to search on for department name, for example, for that information. So standardizing that data entry makes querying for the data simpler, and also reporting of the data much cleaner. And finally, prior to go live, it can be incredibly helpful for a mandate to come from executive business resources such as project sponsors, that the CTMS must be used according to their release schedule, and that the use of the legacy worksheets and logs must be discontinued. So the last thing that you want is investing in a CTMS to centralize all of your data, but your users are still hanging on to their spreadsheet. So that's something that to address very early on during that design process. So you incorporate some of those important spreadsheets and what they're tracking into your system, and make sure that users are bought into that. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons for low user adoption for new systems. If there's no clear directive that as of a certain date, old ways of tracking should be discontinued, users will continue using them. But if it's clear that the expectation of everyone from senior leadership is to use the system, user adoption is no longer an issue. So that's really important. So those are our best practices. Hopefully, for again, prior to implementation, during implementation, things to consider when looking at a CTMS. So hopefully that's been helpful. And with that, I will now open up the session to any questions that you may have. And again, the best method to use is to use the chat feature. So if you do have any questions, please enter them in the chat, and then we'll address them as we have time. Eugene,
Great,
do you have any questions?
Okay. Yeah, so far we have one question that relates to TMF, but you can go ahead and answer it if it makes sense. Is there any one particular best way to shift from a completely paper TMF system to a completely electronic one? And you might want to answer that as either CTMS or TMS, however you feel is best.
Sure. So, we get this question a lot. I mean, I don't think there's any best way or best solution to sort of go to an eTMF, fully electronic, trial master file system. Your CTMS is not going to cover it. So typically your CTMS is not going to have a component of electronic trial master file, but it does integrate very well with eTMF solutions. So there's a variety of eTMF solutions that are available, or you can utilize content management solutions for eTMF, and the integration that works well is where you're tracking, because you're tracking the life cycle of those documents before they're in their final state, right? You're tracking all of that information in CTMS from a document tracking perspective. So, what you've sent to the site, what the site has sent back to you, what's been approved, what's been signed, expired, all of that. So all of your site documents are actually tracked. The site documents are actually tracked within CTMS, but the actual physical physical storage of that document is going to be in your TMS solution. So, whatever document management system that you're using or eTMS system you're using, you will want to integrate your document tracking records within CTMS, or your document tracking module within CTMS, and the physical location of that document to really give the best the best visibility to your study team. So, if you're tracking this document in CTMS, you'll have a link potentially in CTMS where you click on it. It'll open up your eTMF, and you can actually see that stored version of the approved scanned document. So that's a way to sort of close the loop and integrate both of those solutions. So you're not going to want to use your CTMS to store documents, but you'll want to integrate between the two.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how does this CTMS system generate queries, or are queries manually created by reviewing listings? A well-programmed query system is well preferred.
Okay, so if we're talking about searching through the system, most CTMS systems, including Siebel, have a very robust way of querying the data across all of the measures that we talked about that can be tracked within Siebel, and it's there's abilities to have personal queries as well as saved queries for the organization. So if you have a standard programmable need to have global queries that are set up to be able to be used, then this system allows you to do that. So that's one of the sort of main benefits of the system, that you're able to get the data out of the system very, very effectively. If we're talking about specifically queries, outstanding queries from a data management perspective, that's typically not within scope of a CTMS. So that's going to be your data management system to looking at sort of outstanding queries. So I hope I've answered that question.
Great, thanks. The next question is quite subjective, and feel free to either answer it or rephrase it. What are the strong points of CTMS compared to Impact?
So I assume that question is the strong points of Siebel CTMS as compared to the Impact CTMS solution. What I will say is, in terms of the main reasons that we find clients are choosing Siebel CTMS over some of the other systems that are available, is for a few reasons. One, it's obviously the leader in the CTMS space. So you talk about the number of users that are using Siebel CTMS versus any other solution out there. It's number one. Oracle has made significant investments recently into the CTMS product, and they continue to do so. So that's obviously evident in Oracle's sort of investment into the system to continue to keep it updated. The other couple of reasons that I think are really strong is Siebel is a very openly architected system. So what I mean by that is it's scalable, it's configurable, it's not very sort of rigid in the way that you have to use it. You can configure it. It's very flexible. It's openly architected, so you can actually make changes to the system using the inherent tools of the system. And the other thing around openly architected is the fact of integration. So from an integration standpoint, I don't I think the system is very powerful. You can integrate the system with virtually any other system out there, and there's inherent integration tools built into the solution to handle things, real-time integrations, web services, as well as batch integrations, and sort of automating all of that. So there's a variety of different mechanisms and approaches that come with the system to be able to integrate it. And obviously, I mentioned earlier about being scalable. So you want a system that is going to not only handle your needs today, but is going to be able to scale both as your organization grows, in size and user base. It scales really well, from a hardware perspective, but also from a functionalities perspective. You're able to sort of build on it, and the system is designed to evolve with your business needs and your functionality needs. So that's really what are the key drivers that that we feel that our clients are choosing Siebel over some of the other CTMS systems that are available.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, how does Siebel deal with early phase or phase 1 studies?
So we have had organizations that use Siebel for early phase and phase 1 studies. There are some challenges with the out-of-the-box sort of version of it, where obviously phase 1 studies are there's a lot more compacted in sort of time, where you're talking about with phase 1 studies of what you need to track, and it's more timely. It's shorter time points that need to be tracked, so that becomes a little bit of a challenge. Also, tracking things like number of beds that are available in various clinics, and what's being utilized, what's being, what's open. We've had requirements around that, from a phase 1 standpoint, and that's something that we can configure within the system, to be able to do that. But out of the box with the standard system or with the accelerator, really doesn't handle sort of tracking of those types of resources and sort of the whole hoteling sort of capability of what phase 1 studies needs in terms of resource management. So there are some challenges with that, but if you're looking for a study to sort of consolidate all of your sort of study tracking needs, along with your phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 studies that you do internally and want to keep them all together, Siebel CTMS offers that very well, but you'll have to potentially configure it if you want anything more than that.
Great, thank you. The next question is, do you offer webinar demos of Siebel CTMS?
So we've in some of our webinars where we're talking about specific functionality, we do demos of our accelerated solution or of Siebel. So last month we did a webinar specifically on monitoring and trip reports and electronic signature and that whole review and approval process. So during that webinar we did go into the demo of the system. We also did a demo of the latest version of Siebel and some of the key features of 8.11.11 OpenUI. So we do offer that. So if you look at some of our recorded webinars, you'll see some demos of some of that functionality. But if you're looking for an in-depth demo for your organization specifically, we're happy to oblige that as well. So you can reach out to us directly, and we're happy to schedule more of a targeted demo with your organization and actually go through that with your questions and concerns and business processes in mind.
Okay, so we just got a very long question in here, so I think this will be our last question. What approaches can be used to reduce duplication of data in a CTMS? Often we see the same clinic referenced different ways. For example, the address is slightly different if one instance uses abbreviations for words and one does not. This creates multiple records for essentially the same site. It's a data maintenance problem, and it can cause problems when integrating with other systems.
So that's a very common concern, and the data standards document that I mentioned earlier really addresses a lot of that. So when we implement the solution, the investigator database, the accounts database, when we're talking about doctors and addresses and clinics and hospitals, it's essentially reference data, right? Reference data that's going to be utilized on multiple studies potentially. So yes, you do not want duplication of that data, duplication of addresses and things like that. So the first thing that we want to do is implement a data standards document so you don't have situations where it's 100 Main Street SDREET, and the next time you add the address, it's 100 Main Street SP period. So the data standards, if you're following that, like for example, if you employ the standard way of the standard addresses, the way they're set up by the United States Postal Service, they have a standard way of doing those abbreviations and things like that. So if you employ that, that will address a lot of your concerns around duplication of data, or at least where the addresses are slightly different. The second way that we recommend to doing that is centralizing the update and additions to that reference data. So you don't necessarily want all of your end users to be able to enter in new contacts and new accounts and new addresses in the system. So if you centralize that process, because it's reference data, so if an end user who's using Dr. Jones has an address for them, and the address changes, and if they just override that address and put the new address in there, they're essentially changing it for everybody, because those are globally referenced, data. So they've just changed that address for everyone that utilizes Dr. Jones on their studies. So you want to potentially centralize that update and additions to that data. So you're limiting the folks that are entering that reference data, so you maintain a little bit more data integrity, and if there's a request to put a new doctor in there, that your centralized group at least will query the system and make sure that Dr. Jones does or does not already exist in the system before entering them in. So that's the second way. The third thing is there are some deduplication modules that are available within for Siebel, so that when you do enter in data that looks like to be a duplicate, the system will potentially, utilizing some algorithm, will say that this may be a potential duplicate. Are you sure you want to enter it? We haven't seen that utilized very heavily with CTMS, because there's, when we're talking about CTMS, it's not, that extensive of a database when we're talking about contacts, but it's something that's utilized on financial services or communication high tech, on the Siebel side, where you have millions of records. So that is another option. But one of the things that works really, really well within Siebel, and it's inherent to the application, is the ability to merge records. So on a regular basis, if you look at addresses and look at contacts and accounts, and you recognize that they're duplicates, the last thing you want to do is delete a duplicate, because that duplicate record might be associated to a site or a study. So there's a concept of merging records. So merging in the system allows you to take 2, 3, 4, or 5 records, or however many, and merge them into one golden record, and it retains the associations to child records and site records throughout the system. So that works really, really well. So there's ways to maintain your data on a regular basis and decrease the level of duplication and the level of replication and dirty data that's in your system.
Great, thank you. We have several more questions. Unfortunately, we cannot get to them since the allotted time that we had for this webinar is up. If you do have other questions, feel free to email Putnam, and we can get some answers back to you. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you within several days along with the PowerPoint presentation in PDF form. We have several upcoming webinars that you can register. Feel free to visit Perficient.com and you can see the entire list of upcoming events. We'd like to thank you very much for your participation, and we hope that the information we provided you with today was helpful. Have a great rest of the day and evening. Thank you.